Hey there, interwebs. I hope you're all doing well. So I wanted to have a quick discussion with you about civility and what civility means in a society that is oppressing a lot of different people and how civility is used in certain circumstances to push down minorities. I've been wanting to have this discussion in a much longer video essay, and I potentially will do that at some point on my main channel, but I haven't had enough time because I've been working on a bunch of other projects right now to focus on a couple specific incidents that happened recently that I at least want to talk about in some way. So I'm going to do an off-the-cuff, unscripted discussion right now, and then hopefully at some point I'll do a much bigger deep dive on my main channel, going into like the history of civility, politics, and everything like that. But I'm just going to use these specific examples that happened recently, specifically around the trans community, to discuss civility in a very specific way, and then we can do a deep dive later on and go into the historical aspects of it. So as many of you may have heard, there was something that happened recently surrounding Montana Representative Zooey Zephyr, who is a transgender legislator in the Montana State Legislature. And the reason that Zooey has been focused on recently is the Montana legislature put forth a bill that was going to be one of the numerous bills that we've seen that was going to try to limit transgender healthcare access for, I believe it was specifically for minors, this bill, but as we know, those bills are often used to push for larger anti-trans healthcare legislations, as we're seeing in Florida, which is, it passed from one of those earlier, now they're doing it for all adults. We're seeing it in a few other states as well. And any of those bills are absolutely horrible and disgusting and limit needed health care for many transgender kids, both mental health and, physical health care that can save lives, will expressly save lives of transgender kids, both directly and indirectly. Directly, it's denying kids health care. And a lot of that healthcare, by the way, is given to non-transgender kids, cisgender kids, like puberty blocking drugs and things like that for different issues. But when it's trans kids, oh no, they're too dangerous. So that's all kind of bullshit. But indirectly, these laws getting passed in these states gives a signal to many LGBTQ and specifically transgender youth that the people in power there do not care about them. And that does lead to mental health effects and traumas for many of these kids. For anyone in those states, I feel it certainly too, but especially for kids who don't necessarily have the tools or community or ability to articulate these things, or may not have the support as a transgender person to discuss these issues, and it does lead into depression and also the higher suicide rate. So quite literally, there will be physical harm, mental health harm, and quite literally deaths of transgender and LGBTQ people on the hands of people who push these laws. That is not even a question. That is no doubt. That is a absolute provable fact. However, in the Montana State Legislature, when they tried to push this bill, the people who push these bills don't wish to ever think about that. They just wish to say, oh, we're protecting the children. They always, this line of thought, and to a degree, while I'm sure they understand their cruelty, they want to cognitively believe that they are the good people, that they are the good guys. They don't like to be confronted on the fact that there is blood on their hands for even pushing these bills, attempting to push them, whether or not they pass or not. Whether they pass is even more, but when even attempting to push it, it does signal to all those transgender kids that this is what people in power want for you. So there is blood on their hands, but they don't wish to think about that. They don't wish to be confronted with that. And quite often, they don't have to, because in many other state legislatures, many other places, the people that they're affecting aren't in the room with them, or are people who are not on the same sort of wavelength of them as like fellow lawmakers, to be able to, that they see as equals. And which is why it was so important that Zooey in the Montana legislature quite literally stood up with protesters who came into the building to say everything that I have said and confront these people with these facts. She stood up and showed solidarity with them. And then also, she said when she had the microphone at one point that she said the truth, that, these lawmakers have blood on their hands for pushing this rhetoric.
Today, I rise in defense of those constituents, of my community, and of democracy itself. Last week, I spoke on the governor's amendments to Senate Bill 99, which banned gender-affirming care. This was a bill that was one of many targeting the LGBTQ community in Montana. This legislature has systematically attacked that community. We have seen bills targeting our art forms, our books, our history, and our health care. And I rose up in defense of my community that day, speaking to harms that these bills bring and that I have firsthand experience knowing about. I have had friends who have taken their lives because of these bills. I have fielded calls from families in Montana, including one family whose trans teenager attempted to take her life while watching a hearing on one of the anti-trans bills. And in that hearing, our caucus pleaded with the Republican chair of the Judiciary Committee to not allow certain testimony, to keep decorum. And we were told a lot of people have a lot of opinions on these things. So when I rose up and said, "There is blood on your hands," I was not being hyperbolic. I was speaking to the real consequences of the votes that we as legislators take in this body.
And it should be clear that the phrase, "you will have blood on your hands," is a phrase that numerous lawmakers, politicians have used many times over the years. It's not a ridiculous phrase that people are using. It is a true phrase, especially in this case, but it is one that is not, some radical new crazy thing that people are using in political discourse. However, when Zooey said it, this was taken as a chance by many of the Republican lawmakers in the Montana state legislature to then vote to push out Zooey from being on the House floor for breaking decorum rules was the exact thing they said. She broke decorum. She was calling us out she was insulting her fellow lawmakers, saying they have blood on their hands, and also she stood up and showed solidarity with the protesters. So she broke decorum.
Our state constitution, our House rules, and Mason's Manual of Legislative Procedure all reinforce the fact that this House, this body, holds dear the right to self-protection. We today are exercising this right based on the inappropriate behavior on the House floor of the representative from House District 100 on April 24th, 2023. This behavior violated the collective rights and safety of 99 other members of this body, our staff, our pages, and the public. And based on this showing of good cause, I would recommend a yes vote on the motion to discipline the representative from House District 100.
And so now, quite literally, Zooey is unable to be on the House floor, unable to speak, being unable to sort of be on right there doing the work. And credit to her, she has shown up every day, I believe every day since then, right outside the House legislature and doing her work there to be as close as possible to the floor. And she's also faced a lot of bigotry for that, with many, Karen women coming in and sitting on the bench that she was working on. Again, showcasing how bigotry is meant to continually ostracize and push out trans people from public view and from public spaces. And that's ultimately the goal of things like civility politics. Because what they have done here, what the state legislature has done here by pushing Zooey out under decorum rules, is they are saying that to call out the truth of things, to call out the truth of what's going on, breaks decorum. And it showcases the artifice of how civility and decorum ultimately upholds the, those privileged in power. Because they get to determine what is civil and what is not. And often what is civil is what doesn't make the people who are causing harm uncomfortable. Because that's all that Zooey was doing. She was confronting them with the reality of what they were doing and making them uncomfortable. To be honest, they should face a lot more than just being uncomfortable and being confronted with the reality of this fact. Because they were made uncomfortable, they consider it not civil. They consider it to be, breaking decorum rules. It shows how ultimately these calls for civility politics are just often done to be able to, keep the privileged, those causing harm, feeling comfortable and allowing them to continue doing their horrific actions unchallenged because they don't feel it inside. Something that recently happened too, that showcases, it's a separate situation, but somewhat interlocked with the transitions considering, the discourse that happened with that shooting that happened in Tennessee, which I won't get into the whole details on that because I did a whole video on that on my main channel. But something very recently too in Tennessee happened as well, where 3 lawmakers in the Tennessee House sort of called out and stood up with protesters protesting for stricter gun laws in Tennessee. And the Republican legislature there pushed out just 2 of the 3 lawmakers from the legislature, the 2 who happened to be black. The other person was I believe, a white woman legislature. And they sort of pushed them out. And thankfully, those 2 legislators have gotten back in by their constituents voting them back in. But they pushed them out because they called out that the Republican base there for the harm that they were allowing to continue. And they were pushed out for having broken decorum, but really what they were doing is making them uncomfortable, as they should be. And that situation particularly dovetails even more so with Zooey's situation in Montana, because the fact that it was the 2 black men and not the white woman who did the same thing in that situation also showcases how perception of marginalization can influence how people feel uncomfortable. Because when you have 2 black men in our society are often seen as more aggressive, as more angry, as more vitriolic, and so are often more punished for it. Whereas a white woman, even if she says and does the same exact thing, will be perceived more often to be less aggressive. And that can come out in its own harm other ways, like women being seen as like weaker or, the more emotional. That has its own harm for women in many different ways. But in this particular situation, that was sort of something that allowed the 2 black men to be perceived as angry and aggressive, and therefore more likely to, have broken the civility rules. And it does showcase the underlying racism of the Republicans in the Tennessee House for, pushing them out and not the white woman. And you can tell that these Republicans don't like to be called out on their racism, because there was a meeting where they had a recording where a lot of the Republicans quite literally like, how dare they call us racist? How dare they? But then went on to discuss how they enacted their racist choice to push out these 2 lawmakers.
Please forgive me if my comments do not come across as Christ-like. I think now, more than ever, everyone should recognize that Democrats are not our friends. I listened for the last 3 days to Democrats, Sam McKenzie, Chisholm, Parkinson, trash us as racist. I've never had anybody call me a racist. And for the last 3 days, all I have heard from them is how this is the most racist place. One of these white supremacists. Good Lord, we have to realize they are not our friends. They can smile, but man, that doesn't mean I can't be polite to them, but they are not our friends. They destroy the republic and the foundation of who we are, or we preserve it. That is the reality where we are right now. And if these last 3 days have not proven that, you need to find a new job. There's never been a more important time for us to be unified. There's 75 of us. Let them call their name of the names they're going to call. And we need to move forward. We need to pass the gun bill. We need to pass the pronoun bill, wherever Mark is. Man, we do not slow down because of their crap. We can't.
They don't want to be confronted with the fact of how they perceive the world and how their perceptions of these 2 black men was racist and had racist connotations, and allowed them to view them that way to push them out. They don't like to be called out on that, but they were willing to do it. And it showcases in our society how perceptionally it is worse to be called a racist than it is to actually be racist. It is worse to be called out on your racism, because that is shown as like, oh, how dare you just call me racist, than it is to do a racist action, because racist actions and transphobic actions and other harmful actions is made invisible by the system. These Republican lawmakers say, we were just following discourse rules. We are just following civility rules. And they can put their actions on the system and say, we're just following the rules that were laid out, and sort of place their racist actions on a system that allows them to remove their culpability. But when they are called out on it as specific individuals, they're like, oh, how dare you I'm not racist, I was just following the system. Because the system has dispersed their racist actions into this amorphous blob called civility, or, the status quo. And the same thing with Zooey, is it allows them to disperse their harmful transphobic and anti-trans actions onto a system that when they are then confronted with it, they feel like, oh, how dare you? And what it continually does is it pushes marginalized people out into the edges, continually pushes us out of public view, because our very ability to talk about ourselves and the issues facing us is not deemed civil. It pushes Zooey off the floor. It pushes these 2 black lawmakers off the floor. But while I'm talking in terms of politics, this is how things are used to push many marginalized people out of any space. You know, our transgender bodies are seen as literally sex. We are seen as literally a fetish. And so, you know, there are lawmakers like, or people who have political sort of weight, like Michael Knowles, because he's not a lawmaker technically, saying that we must remove transgenderism from public view. When he's saying that, he's saying that, you know, it's a sexual perversion to be transgender. It needs to be pushed off to the side. Be done in your own bedrooms, or not at all, which is what they want. But they use that rhetoric to be able to push people out of public view because we are seen as inappropriate, incivil, indecent, gross, nasty. And it can happen in any space. It's happened here on YouTube Spaces. It happens in many spaces. And I wanted to kind of have an off-the-cuff discussion, so I'm sure I've missed some nuances here and there because I'm doing this without a script. But I wanted to specifically talk about this situation, about civility and how civility is ultimately used to uphold the status quo, and how it not only harms transgender people, because I talk about transgender issues, but many people of many marginalized identities as well. So again, I'm sure I missed some nuance. I'm sure I've screwed a couple things up in this discourse. Forgive me a little bit because I'm doing it off the cuff here, but I wanted to have the discussion because I wanted to talk about this weeks ago, but I've just been so busy and I don't know when I'm going to get back to it. So I at least wanted to talk about especially Zoe's situation specifically, and shout out to her for doing the work, and congratulations to her for getting engaged to Aaron Reed, who is another fantastic transgender activist, and so congratulations to them. I'm so glad that they have joy in their lives right now, because transgender joy is I would even say more important than just talking about the issues, because joy allows us to fight forward, not fight back. We should fight back. We always fight back. But we also need to fight forward. We need to show them what we need to be doing, showcasing what transgender lives can be, give people the representation of what the world can be like. And I think that is just as, if not more important, because we need to be able to have something to fight for, not just fight against. Because if we're just fighting against, it's just going to ultimately just go round and round and round. So that's everything I wanted to say. Adore you all, and I hope you all, my friends, live long and prosper.